All right, so Skirrid Mountain, a wonderful photo from Andrew. Thank you very much, Andrew, for sharing that. As you know, all of the Patreon projects I do, I select from our image sharing library. Thanks very much, Mark. You can join the team, Mark. Thanks very much for confirming these as I go through. Yes, so I select the monthly projects from the image sharing library. So keep them coming. I choose a different subject every month. This one's going to be more rural, okay, and a wonderful scene here. A lot of depth in this scene that we've got here, looking down over a Welsh valley. This is mid Wales, sunny day, almost looking into the sun, and I think the trick here is trying to get that sense of depth with the distance there in the background, probably several miles away. There, a ridge in the distance. I think we've got a background here. Obviously, the background hills there. There's a little town nestling in the valley. Over to the right, there's a little bit of a ridge or an escarpment there above the town. And then coming towards us, there's some clouds in the sky, and they're creating some shadows across the fields here in this valley. So there's a little bit of a shadow there. Can you see that, with a bit of a soft edge? That's quite a nice element to introduce. And then coming closer to us, we are getting warmer, more vibrant with those greens up to the foreground here, slanting top left to bottom right. A lot of different vegetation in here. We discussed on Pat Chat bracken, if you're familiar with that vegetation, a sort of ferny-like foliage, and quite typical that you would find in the UK in sunny areas like this, and in woodland areas. And then interspersed with that, we've got various grasses and some harebells. I think these are harebells, these wildflowers here, just popping up their heads above the vegetation. Some dark shadows in there as well, soft edges. So there's a fair range of different values. A slightly lighter slope there on that left-hand side, quite light there. And then as we go further down that slope on the left, it turns to some trees and shrubs, and they kind of then merge with that middle ground. Now, it's quite, on the face of it, the more you look at it, the more complicated it can be. For example, all of these houses here in this town. Andrew, maybe you can confirm what that town might be, please. We thought it might be Abergavenny, if that's right. I'm not familiar with the Skirrid Mountain area, but Andrew, if you can confirm what town that might be. I thought Abergavenny was a little bit larger than that. Anyway, so that town, lots of buildings, houses. Oh, Crickhowell. Okay, yeah, it's a little bit. Okay, Crickhowell. Yeah, Crickhowell's a lovely village or small town. Really beautiful. If anyone goes into Wales, going through Crickhowell, it's like it's on the sort of main route from South Wales into the middle of Wales. Beautiful area. Yes, so the complexity of that, and then the patchwork of all of these fields. Now, I think with this, rather than getting hung up and stressed out by all of these hedgerows, maybe think of the main areas of darkness and then try and connect those. Oh, okay, Andrew's come back. It is Abergavenny. Scrub Crickhowell is Abergavenny. Yeah, I think Crickhowell, yeah, they are fairly close, aren't they, to each other, sort of in that southern part of Wales. Yeah, so think about these main little sort of woods or copses there, like one there, a long one here, sort of slicing there, one there, and then connecting them with these hedgerows. But I'm not going to follow these exactly, but I just want to try and get the sense of the area and the sort of gradient. We've got a little bit of there's a tiny bit of a slope left to right. If I just come out a little bit more, tiny little bit of slope left to right there. The other thing for me, as you may know, the dimensions of my paper are more 4 across and 3 down. This is a widescreen photo, so I'm going to take the liberty of cropping the left-hand side and the right-hand side there, and then just sort of concentrate on that middle area. Perhaps trying to go a little bit brighter in that middle as a focal point, and maybe that might stand up a little bit more of that light area against the darker area, hopefully. And yes, there are a few, as I zoom in, there are a few little buildings there. As I paint my various washes, I'm going to try and leave a little bit of the paper unpainted, little tiny slithers of the paper unpainted, and that could be some of these bright roofs showing up against the darker values around them. Yeah, so I hope you're up for the challenge of this one. Good luck if you're going to be painting along with me on this session, but you're very welcome to, of course, just sit back and watch me go through my process and the whole painting steps from start to finish, and you can ask me questions along the way. And then you've got a recording of this. You can play back the recording as many times as you want to, and then you can do it in your own time. Of course, those of you on a critique level on Patreon, you'll get to email me a photo of your painting in due course, and I'll give you a video critique of that, a short video, normally sort of 3-4 minutes duration, where I go through a dive into your painting and just give you my kind of feedback on how it went, and maybe things you could tweak and things I think that went particularly well. More on that later on, and also there'll be a full posting later on tomorrow with all the details of submitting your painting. But it's going to be, those of you that are used to it, it's the same process. Right, I think that's it on the subject. Let me just stop sharing now. So materials: Saunders Waterford watercolor paper, cold press, 15 inches by 11 inches. Normal palette of colors from my particular paints are from Mark Jackman in the UK. But of course there are lots of other brands out there. Try and go for good brands of watercolor paints, but these are my normal colors: neutral tint, burnt umber, burnt sienna, yellow ochre, spring green, viridian green, cobalt green, cerulean blue, cobalt blue, ultramarine blue, alizarin crimson, cadmium red, light red or English oxide, then cadmium orange and cadmium yellow. There's a lavender down here at the bottom right, and a couple of gouache paints there as well. Brushes wise, I'll introduce them to you, but mostly I will be using my Wilmot brush from Tintoretto, and then there's a little fairly narrow flat brush there. Well, it's about half, I think it's about a half-inch width, and then a small round synthetic brush, and maybe for some of the grasses towards the end I was thinking of using a rigger brush for doing the sort of strappy foliage of the grasses. Right, let me just see if there's any questions before I start. Right, don't think there's any. Well, I think it's going to be a fairly simple drawing, this one. Just those main areas, starting with the horizon. Not much of a sky to talk about, but the skyline there in the distance, and then that kind of escarpment coming over from the right, and then these clumps of woods, small woods, maybe just an indication of some of the hedgerows, and then the foreground there, top left to bottom right. Well, let me then start by just putting in the skyline. So there's not much sky to speak of, And we have maybe here, there's the start there of that skyline, and it's sloping ever so slightly to that bottom right, or that right hand side. Just a little bit like that. It's a little bit of a slope. Coming in from the right hand side, we've got the escarpment that comes to an end, and then it slopes gently down into the valley like that. There's a little bit of a wood at the end of that escarpment. So that's going to be a small wood. Then we've got Abergavenny there sitting in the valley. Now, the overall shape, as I see it, it looks like a slim triangle in that we've got the back of the town a little bit like that, almost horizontal. And then on the left-hand side, coming down to the parts of the town that are closest to us, a little bit like that. And then it goes back on itself and then up again. So that, if you can imagine, that is the town. On the left-hand side, the immediate slope coming down is around about there. And this is probably the steepest part here. It's not a straight slope. It does change in sort of gradient as it goes down, and then it sort of takes a steeper dive down into the valley there. That's where the wood starts in there on the lower slopes. Then coming across the foreground, we've got some very light sort of grassy foliage, and here and there's some bracken, but overall it's continuing that downward angle. Coming closer to us, there's some clumps of bracken here. For those of you that aren't familiar with bracken, if you look it up, do a Google of bracken. There we are, 3 clumps of bracken, and there's some of these darker, shadowy shapes in there. The immediate foreground then has a few little mounds of golden grasses. I'm not sure, Andrew, what time of year was this? Was this sort of midsummer? Thanks, Naomi. Bracken equals large fern. Exactly. And it's sort of on like a quite a stout stalk or stem of about maybe a meter or 2 or 3 foot high. And yeah, quite invasive in parts of the UK. Now, coming down to the bottom left-hand corner, we've got some more of these mounds of grasses. And then I'm not drawing in those harebell flower heads, but they'll be sort of interspersed in here. That'll be a later phase in the painting for me. Right, Andrew says early August. Yeah, looks like it. Yeah, sort of, well, midsummer then, really, or just after midsummer, which accounts for the lovely green colours there. Right, let me just double check everything. I think I'm pretty much there with the drawing, really. There is, in the very distant background, there looks like there's a sort of another escarpment or ridge there, slightly just sort of prominent of the distant hills. Right. I need to get in a few more of these woods. So I did that one there on the escarpment. There's a kind of shadowy area here. The line I'm drawing here is the sort of bottom of the valley. We've got that slope going down. There's a slither of wood coming out from the right-hand side. There's a sort of squarish wood on the lower slopes of that middle ridge. Then I'm just picking up on a few of these major hedgerows. This wood that's on the right-hand side, that thin slither, that comes into and joins the bottom of the town and that bottom right-hand corner. And then we've got a few sort of smaller woods in there. And then the sort of patchwork of these hedgerows going all over the place. I'm not going to draw those in. I'm going to be thinking about that as I go into the painting process and define some of those hedgerows, but trying to look at the perspective of the scene and the angle of those lines. So there's a lot in the middle, for example, going that way or almost horizontal. On the right-hand side, there are some following the kind of gradient of the valley, but then there's some that are coming towards us to the lower slopes of the hill where we're on. If you want to get adventurous, by all means include a figure. If you do include a figure, I reckon a good place would be not in the middle, but maybe over on that left-hand side. If you imagine a rambler or a walker here, walking over the slopes and maybe glancing over a couple of figures, that would be a good idea if you want to get adventurous. Right, so that's my drawing done. Now to the painting stage, and primarily with my quill mop brush. I would suggest using a good mop brush that you're familiar with and it holds a lot of water, hopefully with a good point as well and a good edge to it. Quite a versatile brush, but I'll be doing probably 2/3 of the painting with this brush. Let me start off then by putting in a little bit of this sky and just going to put in some clear water first of all, and then drop in some of the sky and the bottom of the clouds as well, which to me is a very light, cool value. Looking at the photo, Andrew, your photo, to me, it looks like a sort of a light, coolish blue, maybe a cerulean blue or a little bit of lavender, possibly. That would be a good option. And then just drop in a little bit of that color into the damp surface. Just alter the intensity of that blue as well in various areas, but just drop that in there. A few horizontal lines that could be the bottom of those clouds, and then go quite light quite light towards the skyline. And just leave it, basically. Nothing fussy, nothing too complicated. Just do that and leave it. Now, as I come towards myself from the background, middle ground, and foreground, I'm going to put in the base color, the lighter colors. Of course, with watercolor, we're generally going light to dark. So the base color of those fields, the darker woods and the hedgerows, and defining maybe some of the, just hinting at some of the rooftops in the town, that will come up next. But let me just get in the base color of these greens, starting with a cooler green in the distance, and then liven things up, get them warmer, get them brighter, more saturated as we come towards us, and then into the foreground. Right, so a cool green. Well, I've got my Viridian, of course. That would be a good option to start with. Don't want it to get too weak, because those, it's summer, they're not, the distant hills are not a million miles away, so we want to make them a little bit green, but don't go too bright with the green, otherwise as you come towards yourself, you're not going to get that sense of depth. Right, so let's just see if I can get to, so I'm mixing a little bit of my spring green with that Viridian. The Viridian might be just a little bit too cool and weak, so I'm just adding a little bit of that spring green as well. And then go in with the green. This is just the base color of those fields. That background then to the start of the town, and it doesn't need to be a particularly good flat wash, because we've got all these different fields and different intensities of green in there. Right, so coming down to the town then, which is around about there. And the town itself, let's put in a blue for some of those buildings. And leave just a few bits of the paper unpainted. So generally a blue. And then back to the green again. Halfway there, start to get a bit warmer with the greens, a bit more vibrant with those greens. I'm going to maybe add in a bit of a cadmium yellow into this as well, just to get that brighter green. Actually, over on that right hand side, it does cool down a bit, and also gets warmer as well, just on the right hand side of that ridge there. And then green again, spring green, bit of cadmium yellow, going over the woods. You might want to add a little bit of red in there just so that the green is not too severe. Spring green, cadmium yellow. These fields in the middle and that bottom right corner, they are really a nice bright green. There we are, nearly there with the first wash. Now the slopes that are coming towards us, the foreground and that left hand side is a cooler green, a little bit warmer as well. So a little bit of viridian, a little bit of red in there. That will be defined more, that slope will be defined more by the woods that we'll be doing next, the woods that will come across from the left-hand side of the town, and then they're going to stop, and that will create that, hopefully, that feeling of the edge there. So as I come towards the foreground, we've got these grasses that are quite, well, this time of year, August, they're just beginning to go over. So they get that kind of golden color as they, with their flower heads and so on. So we want to try and replicate that, maybe with a little bit of light red there, possibly a bit of cadmium orange for me as well. Mixing up then a little bit of red, a little bit of green. And then coming towards me closer, there's these brackens here. Get that in with a stronger mix of that spring green, that sort of vibrant mid-green. And then we go warmer again with those nearby grasses. So light red, let's actually mix some warmer mix down here. Light red, perhaps a little bit of yellow ochre as well. And notice my brush technique here. I'm sort of stabbing the paper, and rather than doing long washes, just kind of stabbing the paper, and hopefully that will give the feeling of these sort of clumps of foliage and sort of subtle Dark areas, lighter areas, little areas unpainted as well. We can make that into, maybe they could be some of the lighter petals of the harebells, just catching the light. Right, continue with my reddish, my autumnal theme here. Over on the right-hand side, there's a very light clump of grasses. And then immediately in the foreground, it does go a little bit greener again. Back to my spring green then. Honestly, it's going to look a total mess right now, but hopefully it'll come good. Bit of green, maybe a bit of brown again. Of course, this is going to dry lighter. Just think about that as you apply these colors. You might think, oh, that's a bit too dark, but it will dry lighter, particularly the more water that you've got in there. Something that's quite thick, that will probably be as is. That will be fairly true to the color, the value. Right, let's go a little bit greener in this right-hand corner. There we are. I think that's about it, actually. Of course, as it dries, it will go this sort of lighter shade, lighter value. Where I am is actually, it's not too humid at the moment, so I would normally get the hairdryer out at this stage just to speed things up, but I think that's all right, actually. So it's still quite damp here, as you may see, with the shine on the surface, but up here, this is actually drying quite nicely. So let me just check if there's any questions. Don't think there is. Nope. Right. Phase 3 then. So we've done the drawing, we've done the first wash, covering all of the paper, except maybe just little accidental areas that we can make into something. And now we are going in with the darks, and again working from the background, coming towards us, the feeling of all of these different patches of woods and isolated trees and hedgerows and so on, go around the town. Need to create a few little rooftops in there. Probably do that once I've got down the hedges. Talking about edges, not hedges, edges, but try and keep it soft in the background, because of course those soft edges will give the impression of things being further away from you, and then slightly harder edges, some of these hedgerows and so on, a little bit of a harder edge coming into the nearby area. Right, let me just wash my brush out. I'm going to stick with my mop brush. You could go to a slightly smaller brush if you wanted to at this stage, but still something that's got a good point to it. Trying to create the feeling of these areas, the shapes of these areas of woodland and those hedgerows. Right, a cooler, darker green for the background. Again, Bridging green. Maybe a little bit of ultramarine blue in this. It's quite blue in the background, isn't it? So, and different intensities of blue. It's actually quite light there. I guess where there's not so much cloud cover there, but there's it's quite dark over on that left-hand side. Right, so ultra blue, bit of that viridian green, and then just try out that for value, maybe on the edge of your paper, just so that you can see what it looks like. Yes, I think that's all right. Make sure it's well and truly mixed. So we've got now if I think these edges are too harsh, too hard, I will soften them up later on, but just coming down to the bottom of the valley floor over on that left-hand side. And we're just beginning to, do you see with these lines, we're just beginning to get the feeling of those fields in between the groups of hedges and trees. Over to the left-hand side of my slope, and then continue up to the skyline. And what I'm doing now is I'm constantly looking at the photo for a little bit of inspiration. There was this sort of rounded escarpment here, this hill that's jutting out, and then it is sort of framed on that right-hand side by more of this cooler, darker color. Right, so continue. Let's put a bit of cobalt blue into this. Continue the right-hand side above that middle ridge. Again, just leave a few little patches exposed there. Could be a few little fields. Now we've got to paint in this middle area here and down to the back of the town. There are a few fields there. Down to the, I guess this is the lower part of the valley where the town is. And a few little hedgerows. To the back of the town. Just pick a bit of a warmer color for some of the areas around the town. Bit of neutral tint, go a bit darker. And on the right-hand side of the town, a wood. Now I need to get that slope right. It does slope down a little bit from top left to bottom right, and then to the edge of the, so I'm skirting around the edge of town and coming up to my slope on the left hand side. And we've got this shadow, the cloud that's covering this sort of far side of the valley. There's the bottom of the valley there. So my colors were ultramarine blue, bit of viridian green, and darker on these slopes. Quite a complex network of fields on that far side, but just a few little lines there just to give the impression of the slope and the gradient and these fields. Now let's complete this middle ground area, still with the viridian green and ultramarine blue, but we're going to have to get a little bit warmer as we come towards us with the greenery of the trees. Try to get them looking good and authentic. Right, there's a, you can see you can get quite a good, with some of these quill mops, you can get quite a good point to it, and it means you don't need to suddenly swap brushes to a smaller one. Now, a lot of these fields, a lot of these hedgerows and woods, they've got a fairly straight bottom edge, and then the sort of outline of the trees are above that. Do you see? So we've got straight edge, and then the canopy of that tree. There's a little line of small trees going up there, a few little ones on the hill there. And with some of the hedgerows, don't have them as continuous lines, maybe lost and found. So lost and found, like a sort of dotted line. And here and there, just a few little dots. I'll come back to soften some of these edges in a minute. Let's continue down this right-hand side, then I'll divert my attention into the town and see if we can depict that correctly. Right, so we're into the valley still and coming over to a few more little woods and copses. Right, there's a little hedgerow there. And of course, along those hedgerows, there are now and again a little tree just poking its head up. Right, Virgin Green, as I'm coming closer, I'm just warming it up a little bit with a brown burnt umber or burnt sienna with that Virgin Green. Actually, some of these in here, they're still a little bit cool, so a bit of the cobalt blue. There's that squarish shape there, and then into this slither coming in from the right hand side. Virgin Green, a little bit of spring green in there as well. There's quite a slope here. This is about, well, it's not 45 degrees, but it's pretty steep here as it comes up, and then it just sort of curves around. These nearer trees will need some darker values, some darker shadows at their base, just to try and connect them with the ground a little bit more. Okay. A bit darker in this area here. There's probably another little cloud above this area, which is making it appear quite dark. In this right hand side, there's a very important network of fields here, which I need to get right. So starting with a hedgerow there, and the hedge comes back like that, and then like that, and then over to the right hand side. Just beyond this slice of that wood in the bottom of the valley, there's on the other side, there's another pattern of hedgerows. Okay, so now coming back towards the town. Let's get a nice square filled in. And then a row of trees there. And now this area here is just beginning to be hidden or obscured by the foliage in the foreground. So we've just got the tops of the canopy just showing through there above those grasses. Continue on these fields. Ultramarine blue, viridian green. Now this area that's in the cloud, in the shade, there's a few little fields in there up to the edge of town. A few little darker trees in the distance, maybe some darker ones along the ridge. Right, very bottom of the valley, there's some darker ones in there. Some isolated trees in the fields. Some of the hedgerows here are quite thin. So that's probably nothing like the photo, but we're just getting the impression of that middle area. And so a line of a hedge, and then randomly put in a few little trees. And then just here, that's where there's the trees are beginning, as this slope comes down, the trees are just beginning to start here, that tree line. So a few sort of curves of my brush mark just to indicate the this nearby foliage hiding what's further away. Right, Abergavenny town. I think I just need to zoom into the town a little bit of my photo for a little bit of inspiration. So complicated. I think it's one of those things where you need to squint your eyes and just try and get the impression of the all of those buildings there. But generally, they are those. I think they are a sort of coolish blue for the actual buildings themselves, the masonry, if you like, the walls, and then just a few sort of reds here and there for the rooftops, and then dark little blobs of green for trees in between some of those houses. Let's see how that goes. Right, I think I'll actually go down to a smaller brush for this. My medium-sized round brush, synthetic round brush. And so I've put in the blue. Is that blue dark enough? I think I might just need to go a little bit darker with the blue here. But I need to be careful to leave just little bits here and there where you can see some little sparkles of something catching the light. There we go. And now just with a paper tissue, just lift off a few areas just to make them a little bit lighter, and also to dry it a little bit more before I go in with some rooftops. So rooftops, not too bright a red. Not too bright a red. And just drop in just a little bit of that red for some of the rooftops. Perhaps that will show up more on the nearby houses. And then some little blobs of green for some trees. They are quite dark. I think part of the town, we've got this cloud covering that far side of the valley. Maybe some of the cloud is actually over the town as well. A darker green, then ultramarine blue, viridian green. Let's see how we go with that. Medium thickness, and then just drop in. Drop in these little trees. Looks like there's an area of green in the middle. Might be a cricket pitch or something. I've missed that out. Just trying to get the impression of that distant town. Of course, not painting every single building there, but just the impression of the groups of those buildings together. And then we've got the bottom right corner there. Well, I've got this smaller brush. This is going to be ideal for putting in some smaller trees here and there. That could be that little light here. That could be a building or something. It's not there, but we can make it into a building. There's another one there. There, another one there. There we are. Might come back to Abergavenny. in a minute. Right, let me just have a little bit of a thought about where I've got to so far. So I think we are pretty much there with that background and the middle ground. I might need to soften things up in here. And the way of doing that is to apply some moisture to certain areas. I've got a sponge. Actually, I've got a couple of sponges to my right. So a damp sponge, and then just in some selected areas, just with that damp sponge, just tap it a little bit and just gently lift off some of the paint, but you're getting a soft edge. I think it needs it in certain areas. I explained that area there is quite light, so let's just lift off. Take your time if you're using this technique. Take your time. It gradually comes away to give us a lighter area, just where there could be some hazy sunshine. Like some of these lighter areas there, the edges are a bit too hard. It gives the feeling of it being a little bit too close. So little sponge. You could use a small synthetic brush just to lift off as well. But there we are. Just make that a little bit softer in that distance. Maybe the far side of tan as well. Yeah, that tan at the moment has got too many hard edges in it, and I think I need to get some straighter lines in there. Maybe where there could be some roads and tree line roads, that might give the appearance at a distance of some straighter lines. I may add in some more trees into those fields there. I'm almost now ready for the foreground and trying to give the appearance of these sort of bands of foliage going down the slope, and then those brighter brackens and those harebells as well. Right, so starting again, sort of starting at the back and working my way forwards. There's a little bit of a cloud coming in from the left-hand side, a little bit of a car shadow from a cloud coming in there. Gives the impression of that slope as well with that shadow. And then on the slopes, there's some small shrubs, dark green, so I've used a little bit of Viridian green, bit of spring green, bit of ultramarine blue, perhaps a little bit of burnt sienna, warm it up a bit. Small brush, and then just apply that to that slope, and think about the angle of that slope as well. So if I put in a bush, get that slope happening, different sizes of bush here. They are a lot darker, these bushes. Maybe they're in the shade as well. So I'm used a little bit of neutral tint there just to help me along. and maybe some distant bits of bracken or smaller shrubs. Coming then to this middle area, and there's a little bit of, can't really see exactly what they are, but some lighter green in there. Some sort of fluffy foliage, just again, just peeking above this sort of band of grasses. And coming into the bracken area, using my finger just to soften up some of those edges as well. Right, this side, so that's my, so let me just get, so that's my grasses, this is my bracken in the middle area. Let me go in with a little bit of a darker, so I've got my flat brush here, and for the shadow, a warmer shadow, neutral tint, cadmium red, just above where the bracken is, there's some darker shadows. So I'm just, with my flat brush, I quite like this technique at the moment where I'm getting this, a hard edge and a soft edge, quite useful to create these sort of mounded shapes of foliage, or could be boulders or whatever. And we're coming up to the hard edge on the bracken. Bit of alizarin crimson. I think it looks like it's quite shiny for you at the moment. That will dry a little bit darker, of course. There's that dark shadow, and then around the grasses as well. Use the finger just to soften up some of those edges. Right, continuing closer to me, let's get in a few more shadows underneath the bracken. I'll stick with this flat brush. And this bracken, they sort of have these layers of foliage. So you've got the stout stem, and then the almost like a little miniature palm tree, little fronds coming out horizontally. So can we try with the brush, get in the feeling of that bracken and the darker values around it. And then over on the left hand side, that is going to be warmer. And warmer there with the grasses. I'll dot in a few harebells in a minute and the stems of those harebells. Right, let me just check I've got these main shapes in. Let's try and make that more of a mound there. And just filling that middle ground right at the bottom. Okay, back to that town of Abergavenny. Need to go a little bit darker with some of the trees on that left hand side. And then a few of those little lines I was speaking about, just to create the impression of maybe a row of houses or something like that. I think that's beginning to look all right, a little bit better. Now, some of these trees that are closer to us, I need to create the form of them a little bit better by putting some shadow at the base of those trees. For example, let me just select some here closer to the slope. So just a little bit of definition to that, possibly a darker line at the bottom of the hedge as well. And then these, a little bit like I was using the flat brush to get that feeling of a mound. Then in the distance, One needs to go a bit cooler. In the distance, same technique. Start at the base and just flick up. Start at the base. And flick up. Hopefully gets the feeling of more of a tree-like shape. And to some extent, it's appearing a little bit there as well in that square. In that square wood. Some of these trees, actually, you can see a bit of shadow. You can see where the light's coming from. So, for example, I could put a tree in here, maybe an oak tree in there, and then a little bit of a shadow going off to the right. Another one in. Another one in here. And then a little bit of a shadow to the right. Nearly there. Don't put in too many of these trees, just to get the feeling of these hedgerows with all the different sorts of vegetation in them. Okay. I think back to the foreground. I need to pull this foreground together, define some of those bracken shapes a bit more, get in those harebells as well, those petals. I think I'm going to need to use a violet or lavender or something like that to create those. Right, let's start with the bracken first of all. So I need to go darker in there. I think I need to go a bit darker actually with these shadows here. For me, I need to go darker. Back to my flat brush and ultra blue. Let's put a little bit of neutral tint. Yeah, let's make my area here a little bit darker. So just create these interesting shapes of that dark shadow behind. With this flat brush, I'm trying to create a little bit of shadow to sort of negatively paint around the lighter colors of those fronds. But I might need to get in some stronger body color. Right. So let me paint in some stronger, lighter greens, which will show up against that, hopefully that darker background there. I'll use this a gouache, and I'll mix this gouache with my spring green. With gouache, if it's in your palette already, it can be quite sort of, it dries up quite a lot, cracks, so it needs a bit of working at to get it to the right consistency. Nearly there. A little bit of spring green. This is a Naples yellow gouache. And I need to create now the impression with that, with the shape of that brush head, create the impression of these sort of layers of that fern-like foliage. I think a flattish head to my brush, and then just create those sort of elliptical shapes. Few little bits of foliage showing up against the darker background. There. I might when I come off air, I might put a little bit more detail there, but I think that's sort of getting close to that sort of those clumps of bracken there. Right, the flowers then of the harebells. Right, what shall I use for this? Well, I think the obvious choice for me is a little bit of lavender. A little bit of lavender. I'll stick with this brush. Lavender and a tiny bit of maybe alizarin crimson in there, but more lavender or a blue. You could use a cerulean blue to try and get this. I need to be thick here. It's going to show up more on a darker background. This lavender's a little bit like gouache. It's dried up a bit since I last used it, and it needs a bit of coaxing to get it to the right consistency. Now, just sort of here and there, a few random, try and make it look natural, this sort of spray of these harebell flowers. Let's have some there. There we go. That's enough. And next, lighter parts of the petals. I'm going to use my white gouache. Well, any white paint would do. If you've been very careful with your painting, you might have some lighter areas like that. Actually, let me just do that. So that lighter area there, that could be the lighter part of a petal, showing maybe there as well, there, there, a larger one. Do you see what I mean? So if you do have a few bits of paper left exposed, that could be, you could use that for the light hitting some of those lighter petals, or if it's in the bracken area. And then if you don't have that, well, some clean white gouache. Let me just make sure my brush is clean and doesn't have any of that lavender on it. So, in fact, that's still a little bit, oh, I should be all right. Clear water. Not too thin, not too thick, but this is some freshly squeezed white gouache. And then think about the direction of the sunlight. Just a little dab of white next to that lavender. Hopefully gives the appearance of a bit of light hitting some of those petals. Not really bell-like, but I think I've got the overall impression. Right, so perhaps with this, could I get in some maybe some grasses and some grasses there. That's going to show up against the darker background, of course. There we go. Not too much. The bracken, they do have the overall sort of appearance of little curved leaflets coming out from that central stem. Okay, now we're nearly there. Now, with my rigger brush, some very slender blades of grass and the stems for the harebells. Rigger brush or a brush with very small head, not black. Maybe some of this sort of reddy brownish color down here. That'll do. So not too much paint on the brush, and then just where we got clumps of those harebells. Impression of a few little stems supporting them. Apologies to any botanists out there if they don't immediately look like air bells. And then take some of those lines over the edge of the paper as well. I think that's quite important, as when that's peeled off and you get that crisp edge appearing, we've got that continuity of the those lines, those stalks. Nothing too perfect. Do I need some extra? Just a few extra blades of grass in there. Okay, I think I'm very, very nearly there. Perhaps some of these lighter areas here could have something darker below them, more farm buildings perhaps. Back to my small brush, good point. And that one there, for example. There's a little bit of a light edge there. That could be a little farm building. With a shadow appearing in those fields. Yeah. I think I am just about done. Of course, as we all know, knowing when to stop is the key here, and particularly with something quite complicated like a distant town, that can be very difficult to say stop or put on the brakes, but I think that's about it. Yeah, finally, let me just have a look at the scene. Have I got everything in? Let's just provide a little bit more strength to that ridge there in the middle ground. And then a little bit on the ridge, and it gently slopes down into the town. Distant fields there. Of course, there are some trees in the distance, but don't make them too detailed. I think I might need a few little trees in this middle area in the valley. There's a few trees in the field as well. Yes, there we are. Might need a bit of coolness there. There's a bit of a very cool green there. Let me just add in a bit of lavender. Let's see if that will work. Just that area there. Not sure what it is. Maybe it's a bit of exposed rock or something like that. Maybe not. Anyway, flat brush and a bit of lavender. Gotta be careful here not to ruin things. Yeah, not sure that's that was a good idea. Anyway, well, that concludes the demo. I hope you enjoyed that, everyone, and especially those of you that were sketching along with me. As I say, I will make a posting tomorrow with full instructions for those on the critique level, as I sometimes do on my video demonstrations, just a little bit of a self-critique to question myself how it went. I think I've got the composition all right with the balance of the sky and everything else going on in this landscape, pretty much following the layout, the composition of the source photo. Think I got the depth okay with the distant mountains. Got to remember to try and keep that soft, and my little technique, if I've gone in a little bit too hard with those edges, just soften things out with either lifting out with a damp brush or a damp sponge, just very gently. Maybe try it on the side of the painting first of all, just to see how it's working before going into that middle area. So yes, I think I got the sense of the background and the gradient. Then it comes down to this valley floor here, the distant town. Maybe it could have a little bit more definition of some objects, trees within the town possibly, but we can see there's sort of something going on there, some sort of habitation. Then these clouds going over the landscape could have got it a bit of a soft edge there around there. Again, my technique with a little damp brush or a damp sponge that would help things there. I like the little bits of sparkle here and there. I've made little buildings out of those bits of the paper left unpainted. There's another one there, for example, that I could make that one into some sort of a farm building. And then the sort of crisscross, the patchwork of all those fields. Yeah, I think I got the balance right there. Not too much, just enough to give the sense of all of those different fields and that lush green grass, sort of midsummer grass there in the valley. And then coming to the foreground, just trying to define those grasses, the mixture of vegetation, the grasses, the bands of grasses coming towards us, and being sort of midsummer, some of those grasses are flowering and they're going a little bit more of a brownish, warmish tinge. And then some of the flower heads, the bracken as well, and those harebells with some of the stalks appearing there, light on dark, dark on light. Yeah, hopefully you enjoyed that, and I'll catch up with you on the next video demonstration. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.